All right, our next thing is old business, which is quasi-new business because it was supposed to be given to the board, but not, and that's the athletic handbook revisions for this year. Now, Art, this is an existing document. Am I right or am I wrong?
No, this has never existed.
It's never, okay, all right.
So it was supposed to be, when I handed it out in June, was supposed to be told then to review it so that it could be, voted on now, because obviously there's things that are going to take effect this upcoming season, including the code of conduct and all that kind of stuff. There's not a lot of, well, I guess the whole thing is a change because it's never existed, but the way this document was created was based upon, and I think, I could be wrong, but Mike, I think you were on the committee, Mike Welch, maybe Dan, there was a parent committee, not last year, a year before, that came up with a bunch of different ideas, and this was on one of my things to do. So I took that huge document that the parents came up with and that board members came up with, and we had a bunch of documents from what other schools did, so kind of put it all together in what we believed in and what people wanted to see. So we created this document that has not existed before. The stuff in here that has existed, like the transportation policy, that's what we currently do. The code of conduct existed, but I took basically the warning step out. And that it sounded like that's what people wanted, and I agreed that this document is the warning. So when you break a code, that you start. So that was a little bit of a change, but most of the stuff, policy-wise, is what we currently are doing. But it has never been put into a handbook form for parents.
The code of conduct is in the student handbook, though.
Correct.
That is, like what would happen, violation 1, violation 2, and so forth.
Does it align with that?
This has changed, and they've taken it out of the handbook and put into this book.
So it's not in the handbook right now?
Now, the handbook does have a statement that will read that you'll be given a separate, code of conduct that you'll need to sign off on, and that for athletics, and that by signing your school student handbook and planner, that you recognize that everything in this handbook, if you're involved in athletics, you will be responsible as well for. So we did anticipate that.
Art, how will kids get this so the board is clear on that? Will every student sign this like they do the handbook?
Every student has a signed document that they had this year also on code of conduct, but there wasn't these many pages of different expectations. So they go online like they do now to get all of our forms, the physical form, the consent form, which includes this, and then emergency card form, all online. They fill those all out, turn those in, they get a pay to participate form, then they can try out.
And you have a verification process in your office established so that when a kid registers for a sport, now they'll pay their $75 and we'll check for proof of signature on this form before they start, so that we don't get caught up in the fall sports that start in August before school starts. If an incident occurs and a kid gets a code of conduct, we want to make sure we have that
Before the
signed.
students can come to that first day of tryout, they have to get a pay to participate pass, which they have to turn in all these forms to get that pass, which we started last year and it worked out great.
Or just a participation pass.
Or just a participation pass. I mean, then we'll have the pay to participate on top of that because we got to pick the teams then. But we started the forms last year as turning it into my office during residency days. Come to that first day of tryout, all the paperwork is done, it's off the coach's hand, we have everything set, we're good.
Well, I got two of these. What's the one, this one and this one?
The one that says draft,
Yeah.
one I handed out today,
Yeah.
says 7, 12, 11 on there. There's a few minor changes that me and Pam went over today and just kind of corrected a few things from the original document that you got back in June, based upon some of the suggestions by the board member. We did not make all those because we didn't necessarily agree with some of them, but we did make some changes or take a few things out. So we crossed out what we took out and highlighted maybe a word change here and there.
Well, that's a big difference.
What page, Mike?
It's the same.
Art?
From the code of conduct this year.
Well, this page here on 14, and what we received in our packet,
Showing the change.
No, it's the same thing. It was missing suspension, the word suspension.
no, what I got said, first offense, 1/10 of a sports season.
That's what it still says.
Suspension from
Yeah.
110. He just
Just
inadvertently
put
left
some
the
extra
word.
words.
And then you-
Reworded.
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It was the same policy this year. That would have been the second offense. It was like a warning, a verbal warning.
Well, since I made a bunch of comments, and I appreciate you taking some of them, I will still say the same thing. This code of conduct, I mean, I have a fundamental position. I think the sports should be student-centered. You know, we're not Division I NCAA, we're not training people for the Olympics. I've had a lot of experience with the sports here, and kids should have as much opportunity as they can. And as I put in here, this is very coach-centric, and in my mind, not very student-centric. And for instance, I mean, if we vote on this idea that if a kid wants to quit a team, they can't play a sport for a year.
We
I've-
changed that to
okay,
the
I mean,
sports season.
Okay.
Remove that.
To
But-
that season.
But why are we putting a higher standard on our students in here than we put on the coaches?
All the comments that you had on coaches,
Yeah.
the coaches have a handbook.
Okay,
And you haven't seen that yet,
No,
because
I
that was
haven't.
introduced last year as a new document that had never been created. So I will have a new handbook for this fall, but I can't make it until we have our coaches in place to put in all
Okay,
our
I
contact.
got
But
you.
you will see all the stuff that you had commented on coaches is in the coaches handbook.
all right. So now that helps a lot.
Yeah.
Okay.
You could-
Hey, Art, I got a question on implementation of.
What page?
Page 6. Coaches are required to provide athletes with schedule of practices and contests. That's been real spotty in the past. Some coaches are really great, and some of, you know, and they email you when there's something coming up that week. Some of them are devoid of it. But going to page 10, expectations of parents, you promote the active role of the parents in it. As far as implementation, is there some way of conveying that it would be your policy to have the coaches put the schedules online as a matter of policy in Pam's new website?
Well, what I'm gonna do is have a standard format for each coach's website, each team website, and on there will be schedule,
Yeah.
practice schedule. And to get more, you know, it's a work in progress of this year evaluating coaches and noticing some were really good with that, some were not so good. So we
Yeah.
have to kind of tweak that where we're all on the same page, and I'm gonna expect every coach to give out to parents the exact same thing.
Yeah, I expect my kids to grow up and be responsible, but you know what, they're still kids. And I want to stay ahead of the curve. I mean, looking through Ross's backpack's like an archaeological dig. You know, I found things from last year. So I don't always get it, but I want to make sure that we're there for him if he needs help, or Ariel needs help to get to an event.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Would we ever move, we never collect data, where you could send home a form to parents and an evaluation, were you satisfied with, this, whatever, have it developed and they send it back to, not that we see the actual data, but that you could come back to us and say, we got the parent evaluations back and, we acted upon, whatever we found out in our evaluation. But in every college class, the college students get to evaluate that professor, and it's online for the next classes. We spend almost $1 million in sports, and I don't know that we get community feedback on all these coaches and use that into the next year, hiring the next this and that.
I think that's a great point. I think this, once again, it's like creating stuff that we haven't had. We didn't have evaluation forms for coaches before, so I implemented that this year. I think now when we have Skyward and these other ways to get that information out there, that's a great thing that we could do is I could send out a survey, an athletic survey to comment on whether it be a certain team or a certain coach, but get feedback like that too. I've had a lot of parent phone calls and people know that, call me, call the coach to try to increase that communication that we haven't had before. And I think that's one way we can do that.
I think we also just want to make sure that would be one data point used in the evaluation.
Right.
So that the notion doesn't get out there that if a
parent
group of
is-
parents are upset with a coach, they can
Right.
get that coach. I mean, that would be a data
But we
point.
have the evaluation form on my end. We'll have the evaluation form that will start with the kids and get their feedback on their experience and then, just using different.
Which was one of the district goals, was to get some baseline data on on not only student participation, but satisfaction and in their engagement in whether it was a sport or activity. And that was something that in the report I said, we didn't accomplish that this year. Lots of things we got done, but that was one thing we did not get done. So that's something that we're gonna look to complete next year.
Any other questions for Art or
Just
Pam?
two. Oh, go on, John, I had to change.
Let's see, page 7, I think the transportation policy, I don't know if it's completely clear about parents' rides, maybe contradictory.
You have to have written permission.
It says you have to have written permission, then it says at the very end, no student can get a ride with any parents, even with a note.
With another
With another
app.
parent.
You got, it's only your own parents.
Another athlete's parent.
Another
So
athlete's
I
parent.
I had trouble with that, maybe you want to make it clear, sorry.
Maybe say other than their own parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we currently have. Our current policy is if a parent needs to take their son or daughter home or to an event for whatever reason, there's a written note or an email, which I sign, put on file in the office, give to the athlete, they take to the coach so that they know it's been cleared.
Well,
So you can't carpool.
yeah, why, if a parent writes a note, which of course relieves us the liability and says, can they ride, if I wanted John to drive home my daughter from a swim meet for some reason, why isn't that allowed? I know it's been that way forever. Or, for instance, I have a 22-year-old daughter. Why can't I have my daughter drive my freshman son home from a football game if need to be or wherever, take somebody to the hospital or whatever they're going to do, visit somebody? Why don't you allow that?
We
I would
talked about it for a while.
I would assume it's
Yeah.
probably a majority of just liability.
Liability reasons.
Well, if the
But I mean,
parents
if
write a
it's-
note
Right.
saying somebody can drive it.
I think
we have
if it's a
liability.
family member, it's one thing. I think it's the matter of where you start getting into, Mr. Walsh is gonna drive home my son and my daughter, and before you know, you have.
I
three or
could
four
see
I would
kids.
eliminating
assume-
you don't want cars a lot, but,
Yeah.
this basically says as a parent, if I have a reason to write you a note, say, can Mike drive home my son? He can't.
Yeah, I've seen it go to the extreme where this was allowed at a school and then they rescinded that and put it back in place. Because what happens is sometimes the team goes back and they're debriefing about something. They have to unload the bus, take care of equipment. There are things to do that are part of the responsibility. And it gets difficult with the paperwork. I've seen a coach or a sponsor, I'm even thinking a band event, trying to mark on a chart, like do I have all the papers, and all of a sudden the kids aren't there. So
I'm not disagreeing that you
so
want to
that's
limit
kinda
it,
what-
but I'm saying,
Right.
if the parent has a legitimate reason, maybe my wife's in the hospital, and I want somebody to take him there. This would
I
prohibit
mean, I think
that.
there's special situations
Okay.
that even have occurred this year where
Right.
things have happened where the coach will call me at the event. We don't have the note, this is
Okay.
what happened. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
But the other thing was unclear from the last chart. If you're on second offense on the first row, and then you would be a first offense on the second row, is it a first offense for that one or not? Are the
What page?
rows cumulative on page 14?
So if
That's
you're,
unclear. If you're already on a second offense on category A, and you commit a category B, which would be a first offense, do you go to first offense on that one?
Well, they're different offenses.
I understand that, but if I'm already on suspension for 1/2 a year because I was at a party, and then I go, now, the next time I'm possessing drugs or selling them or whatever, after I'm already on a 1/2 suspension for the first offense at a more serious level, now I'm on a, that's 1/2
You're
a
at the
season, so it's the
same-
rest of it,
same
so it is
thing.
cumulative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has,
It adds on top.
this has been what we've been living,
Okay.
except for we eliminated the first column, which was a verbal warning.
Okay.
They're not clean
Art-
as well.
or going back to the transportation policy, I can see where John's could get, because in the introductory paragraph, it says no athlete should be allowed to drive or ride with others unless written permission is given. So that contradicts 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, I have to reword it.
Okay.
Okay.
I just have a couple other things. This isn't, you haven't written this up yet, have you? You haven't finalized it? Why don't we have the fundraising thing in here, and why don't we have the pay-to-play in here?
pay to play, because obviously we hadn't approved it yet. The
Right.
fundraising is in the coach's handbook, which we can certainly add into this. It's just a form that the
I
coaches
think-
have always got.
As Laura was saying, it may
Oh, we can
help with
absolutely.
communication
There's
with
just
the
a
parents.
fundraiser approval form for coaches right now. There's not, but I can make a general run
I think
for
something
parents.
for the parents' information. would be
Are you
useful.
talking about the sample letter he was making a referral of, that it's
Well,
it's
just-
voluntary?
yes, it's
and the
voluntary
money
and
will
all
be
that
used
stuff.
I think
for-
you could put, you could put a
Board
section called
policy.
fundraising and say it's voluntary.
The language,
Required,
right.
yeah.
I would just copy the board policy and put board policy, right in
Yeah.
there, so they see that.
Okay, any other questions?
Are we moving to approve this tonight?
You might want to put the schedule of the sport where you're thinking of doing that, Art?
That'll be on the website.
Okay.
We can- I mean, it'll be right next to this.
Okay,
We'll just
that's
print
fine.
out with the
Art,
forms.
before motions are, if we make a motion tonight, I think what we should do is treat this like our code of conduct for the school, the handbook. This should be a living document,
Right.
and you should have a parent and student committee on a yearly basis. Bring this to the, review this after January and early February, let them work on it for a month or two, and bring this to the board in March or April that there's been a 360 evaluation of this document, verbiage has been cleaned up, additions have been added, so that it's just like the handbook, just like the state requires with your rule book, we should do the same thing with this athletic handbook, so it's constantly working and living.
Okay.
If I could please add, sorry.
Just two more comments, because the purpose is to give this to the athletes, but I also see you have a section there for the parents and for spectators. And is this only for some additional support to give to a spectator if you find out that they're, I'm just trying to understand the context of why you included those two sections.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's the athletic handbook for parents and
Okay,
their
fair.
athlete, obviously. The spectator one, I mean, we've gone back and forth with other schools of what do you post to make sure you have a common policy for those spectators. This will be on our website, so anybody's looking for general rules for athletics, they could go to this and at least see that there's a section. If you're coming to RB just to watch an athletic event and you're not on either, you're just a spectator.
Plus, the majority of your
There are some rules.
spectators are parents anyway, right? You looked at-
Right.
Yeah, no, I just want to know, so it
Can
can also
I
be
tell
an
you right now,
additional
though,
tool to refer to.
That is a
Right.
big issue.
I-
Even in college, when I was coaching college football, that was a big issue with spectators.
How about Little League?
Oh, Little League, okay, Little League too, I agree. Not Little League, all right,
One more thing.
yeah.
The work in progress with the coaches' evaluations by the parents, I think this was brought up at a couple meetings ago. Maybe we can get the coach of the year, some type of format for that. It may not have to be in the handbook, but just that idea I want to bring to your attention. Some type of way to recognize the outstanding coach here.
Okay. I'd like to, Art, you would like us to approve this tonight with the changes that have been highlighted, am I right?
I think
Yeah,
I could
just
make a
be-
motion that would cover
Just
it.
because the parents have to sign the form in order to participate.
Okay, then can I have a motion on it?
I will, because I will. By the way, you did a nice job on this thing.
Thank you.
Can I say right now, very good job. I saw your coach's handbook last year, this built right off.
Resolved that the Board of Education Township High School District 208, Cook County, Illinois hereby approves the athletic handbook substantially as presented in the July 12, 2011 Board Agenda Packet with amendments to by adding a fundraising policy section, a pay-to-pay policy section, and amending the transportation policy as addressed.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by John Keane.
So,
Any other discussions?
but next year, we won't be approving this, assuming all this will get added, right? We'll have more time to look at it in clean form and then approve it in clean form.
Well, I think what'll happen next time, so next year, like, we'll get it in May, you'll have the feedback from the student, parents, coaches group looking at this for any additions or any changes, modifications, and then they'll come to us and be able to present what changes they make. All right?
But certain aspects may not be decided, such as the pay to play next, if we have sports next year, if we don't vote on whatever that fee will be.
That's not my question. My question was, it was new business this meeting and we're voting on it, and I'm uncomfortable with that practice. We had several changes. I almost would have liked to have seen what they looked like, but I understand It's new and time is short, but I would not like this to be a precedent on how we
No.
handle everything.
I do not.
I think at the beginning, he somehow indicated that we got this
We did.
somehow in June, but they didn't tell us this was a first reading and to review it and to be prepared to vote on it next time, so
what
that was a mistake that led us to this tonight.
Which
'Cause they
means it was
never
new
told us.
business tonight, right?
Because they never
Right.
told us that at the prior meeting.
Right.
All right. Any other? Marion?
Mr. Moon?
Aye.
Mr. Walsh?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Goodchin?
Yes.
Ms. Ruska?
Yes.
Dr. King?
Yes.
Mr. Cindy?
Yes. Okay, and then Art, you gave this out, but we're not talking about this now.
No, that's just informational stuff, just to give you, of what we plan on sending out next week on, with our ad book, regarding the ad book that we've talked about before, just so you had the information, so if you see it out there, someone talks about a letter they got at their business, you knew about it.